The dark waters of the North Atlantic concealed a deadly predator beneath the rolling waves. It was the middle of the night in October 1940, and a convoy of merchant ships plodded heavily toward the United Kingdom. On the bridge of the lead escort, anxious eyes scanned the horizon for the telltale silhouette of a surfaced submarine. Suddenly, a bright orange flash illuminated the darkness as a torpedo struck a tanker amidships. The explosion roared across the water, signaling the beginning of a coordinated slaughter. This was not a random encounter, but a calculated ambush by a pack of wolves that hunted in the vast emptiness of the ocean. The battle for survival had begun in earnest. The survival of the British Empire hung precariously on these fragile supply lines that stretched across the globe. Every ounce of fuel for the Royal Air Force and every loaf of bread for the civilian population had to arrive by sea. If these merchant vessels could be destroyed faster than the shipyards could replace them, the island nation would be forced to surrender within months. The German naval strategy was simple yet terrifyingly effective in its cold logic. They did not need to defeat the British Grand Fleet in a traditional battle. They only needed to sever the arteries of trade that kept the heart of the Allied war effort beating. At the center of this maritime siege stood Karl Donitz, a naval officer of singular focus and unwavering determination. During the interwar years, he had meticulously studied the failures of the past to forge a new doctrine of submarine warfare. Donitz believed that the submarine was not merely a support vessel for the surface fleet, but the decisive weapon of future conflicts. He envisioned groups of submarines communicating by radio to overwhelm convoy defenses with simultaneous attacks. While the big gun battleships captured the imagination of the public and the naval high command, Donitz quietly prepared his small force of gray wolves for a tonnage war. The question that haunted the Admiralty in London was whether this new form of warfare could truly bring a global superpower to its knees. Could a fleet of relatively small and fragile boats, operating in the harshest conditions imaginable, strangle the supply lines of an empire? The stakes were absolute, as the failure to contain the submarine threat would mean the end of British resistance and a total victory for Germany in Europe. The answer would not be decided in the halls of government, but in the freezing gales of the Atlantic, where young men fought and died in iron coffins. The answer came at a staggering cost of human life and material destruction that nearly tipped the balance of history. The German U-boat arm inflicted catastrophic losses on Allied shipping, sinking thousands of vessels and sending millions of tons of supplies to the ocean floor. Yet through a combination of technological innovation, intelligence breakthroughs, and sheer industrial might, the Allies eventually turned the tide. The hunter became the hunted, and the once feared wolf packs were decimated by air and sea power. The story of the U-boat is a testament to the terrifying potential of asymmetric warfare. To understand the lethality of the U-boat in World War II, one must look back to its origins in the previous global conflict. At the dawn of the 20th century, the submarine was viewed by many naval traditionalists as an ungentlemanly novelty. It was a dangerous contraption that was just as likely to kill its own crew as it was to damage the enemy. However, Germany recognized the potential of this technology to counter the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Royal Navy. They began to invest in the development of the Unterseeboot, a vessel capable of operating independently in hostile waters. The true potential of the submarine was revealed to the world in September 1914 during a single shocking hour. A solitary German submarine, the U-9, commanded by Otto Weddigen, encountered 3 elderly British armored cruisers on patrol. In a display of ruthless efficiency, Weddigen torpedoed and sank the Aboukir, the Hogg, and the Cressy in quick succession. Nearly 1,500 British sailors perished in the cold North Sea, a loss of life that stunned the naval establishment. The age of innocence at sea was over, and the submarine had proven itself as a weapon of strategic significance. This sudden devastation sent shockwaves through the British Admiralty and the public alike. The idea that a tiny, invisible boat could destroy 3 massive warships was difficult to comprehend. It instilled a deep sense of paranoia among Allied sailors, who now felt unsafe even in waters they supposedly controlled. The psychological impact was just as powerful as the physical destruction. The U-boat menace forced the Royal Navy to divert precious destroyers and resources to protect their capital ships, altering the strategic balance of the naval war from the very beginning. Despite this early success, the U-boats of World War I were limited by the technology of their time. They were essentially surface ships that could submerge for short periods to attack or escape. Their underwater speed was slow, and their battery life was severely restricted. Communication with headquarters was difficult, and they lacked the sensors to find targets at long range. Commanders had to rely on their eyesight and intuition to locate enemy ships in the vastness of the ocean. These limitations prevented them from fully severing the British supply lines in the early years of the war. As the war dragged on and the stalemate on the Western Front consumed millions of lives, the German High Command grew desperate. They decided to unleash the full fury of their submarine fleet by declaring unrestricted submarine warfare. This meant that U-boats would sink any merchant ship found in the war zone around the British Isles without warning. It was a gamble that risked bringing neutral nations, particularly the United States, into the conflict. However, the German leadership believed they could starve Britain into submission before American military power could arrive in Europe. The ruthlessness of this new policy was exemplified by the sinking of the ocean liner Lusitania in May 1915. The great ship was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland, sinking in just 18 minutes and taking nearly 1,200 lives. Among the dead were over 100 American citizens, sparking outrage across the Atlantic. The attack was a propaganda disaster for Germany, painting the U-boat crews as pirates and murderers in the eyes of the world. It galvanized public opinion against Germany and set the United States on a slow but steady path toward war. In response to the mounting losses, the Allies finally adopted the convoy system in 1917. Merchant ships were grouped together and escorted by warships armed with depth charges. This simple tactic forced the U-boats to attack the convoys where the defenses were strongest. The presence of destroyers made it dangerous for submarines to surface and use their deck guns, forcing them to rely on their limited supply of torpedoes. The convoy system immediately reduced shipping losses and provided a lifeline to the beleaguered British population. The defeat of Germany in World War I led to the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The victorious Allies demanded the surrender of all German submarines and strictly forbade the construction of any new ones. The remaining U-boat fleet was either scrapped or taken by the victors for study. It seemed that the German submarine arm had been consigned to history, never to rise again. However, the naval architects and officers who had witnessed the potential of the weapon were not willing to let their knowledge die. In the years following the war, Germany engaged in a covert program to keep their submarine technology alive. They established front companies in foreign countries, such as the Netherlands, to design and build submarines for other nations. This allowed German engineers to experiment with new designs and technologies without violating the letter of the treaty. They refined the pressure hulls, improved the diesel engines, and developed better torpedoes. This secret rearmament ensured that when the time came to rebuild the Navy, the plans would be ready. It was during this clandestine period that Karl Donitz began to formulate his revolutionary tactics. He realized that the failure of the U-boat in the previous war was due to a lack of coordination. Individual submarines hunting alone could be easily avoided or hunted down. Donitz proposed grouping U-boats into wolf packs that would attack a convoy simultaneously from different directions. This would overwhelm the escorts and create confusion, allowing the submarines to massacre the merchant ships. He drilled his men relentlessly in radio communication and night surface attacks. The workhorse of this new fleet was the Type 7 U-boat, a design that struck a perfect balance between size, range, and armament. It was small enough to dive quickly when attacked by aircraft, but large enough to operate in the rough waters of the Atlantic. The Type 7 became the most produced submarine in history and the backbone of the German naval effort. These boats were rugged and reliable, capable of withstanding immense pressure and punishment. They were the iron homes for thousands of young German sailors. When World War II erupted in September 1939, the U-boat arm was still small but highly professional. They wasted no time in making their presence felt. Just hours after the declaration of war, the passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by a U-boat, signaling that the Atlantic would once again become a battlefield. Although the sinking was a mistake by an overzealous commander, it set a grim tone for the conflict. The Royal Navy immediately initiated the convoy system, remembering the hard lessons of the previous war. The audacity of the U-boat commanders was demonstrated early in the war by Günter Prien. In a daring operation, he navigated his submarine, the U-47, into the heart of the British naval base at Scapa Flow. Under the cover of darkness and utilizing extreme skill, Prien torpedoed the battleship Royal Oak as it lay at anchor. The ship capsized and sank, taking over 800 sailors with it. Prien escaped undetected, returning to Germany as a national hero. The raid proved that no harbor was safe from the reach of the U-boat. The strategic situation changed dramatically in 1940 with the fall of France. The German Navy gained access to the Atlantic ports on the French coast, such as Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and Brest. This eliminated the need for U-boats to take the long and dangerous route around Scotland to reach the shipping lanes. They could now sail directly into the Atlantic, greatly extending their time on patrol. The British realized with horror that the U-boats were now operating on their doorstep. With the new bases operational, the U-boats enjoyed a period of unparalleled success known as the First Happy Time. British escorts were in short supply, and their anti-submarine tactics were still primitive. The wolf packs roamed the ocean with impunity, sinking ships faster than they could be built. Aces like Otto Kretschmer and Joachim Schepp became celebrities in Germany, their tonnage scores broadcast over the radio. During this period, it seemed entirely possible that the U-boat alone could force Britain out of the war. Life inside a U-boat during these patrols was a test of human endurance. The air was thick with the smell of diesel oil, sweat, and moldy food. Fresh water was strictly rationed, meaning the crew could not shower for weeks at a time. The heat in the tropics was suffocating, while the cold in the North Atlantic froze the condensation on the steel walls. Privacy was non-existent, with men sleeping in shifts in the same bunks. Every crash dive and depth charge attack frayed the nerves of the crew. The British responded to the crisis by frantically building new escort vessels. The corvette, a small and uncomfortable warship based on a whaling design, became the symbol of the Atlantic battle. These ships were cheap to build and could be manned by reservists. They bobbed like corks in the rough ocean, making life miserable for their crews. Despite their limitations, the corvettes provided the essential screen that convoys needed. They were equipped with ASDIC, an early form of sonar, to detect submerged submarines. A technological arms race ensued between the hunters and the hunted. The Allies developed radar sets small enough to be fitted on ships and aircraft. This allowed them to detect surfaced U-boats at night or in dense fog, stripping away the cloak of invisibility that the submarines relied on. The Germans countered with radar detectors, but the Allies constantly changed frequencies to stay ahead. The introduction of high-frequency direction finding allowed the Allies to triangulate the position of U-boats whenever they used their radios. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 opened a new hunting ground for the U-boats. Operation Drumbeat saw German submarines sailing all the way to the American East Coast. They found the cities fully lit at night, silhouetting the merchant ships perfectly against the shoreline. The American defenses were unprepared, and the slaughter was immense. This period became known as the Second Happy Time, as U-boats sank tankers and freighters within sight of American beaches. Despite these successes, the tide began to turn as the Allies closed the air gap in the mid-Atlantic. Long-range bombers like the Liberator were equipped with extra fuel tanks, allowing them to patrol the entire ocean crossing. The presence of aircraft forced the U-boats to dive, rendering them slow and blind. The introduction of the Lee Light, a powerful searchlight mounted on aircraft, turned the night into day. Submarines could no longer recharge their batteries on the surface in safety. The most critical blow to the U-boat effort came from the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. Through the capture of Enigma machines and codebooks from damaged submarines, the Allies were able to decipher the German naval radio traffic. This intelligence, known as Ultra, allowed the Allies to route convoys away from known Wolfpack concentrations. They could also direct hunter-killer groups to intercept resupply submarines, known as milk cows. Donitz suspected his codes were compromised, but refused to believe the Enigma was broken. The turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic occurred in May 1943, a month remembered as Black May. The Allies had amassed enough escorts, aircraft, and technology to overwhelm the Wolfpacks. In that single month, 41 U-boats were destroyed. Donitz realized that the losses were unsustainable and ordered his boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The hunters had been decisively defeated, and the supply lines to Britain were finally secure. Desperate to regain the initiative, German engineers rushed to develop advanced weapons. The acoustic torpedo was designed to home in on the noise of a ship's propellers, allowing U-boats to attack escorts. The snorkel was introduced, a device that allowed submarines to run their diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth. This meant they did not have to surface to recharge their batteries, reducing their vulnerability to radar and aircraft. However, these innovations came too late to change the outcome of the war. The culmination of German submarine technology was the Type 21, the first true submarine designed to operate primarily underwater. It had a streamlined hull, massive battery capacity, and rapid reloading systems. The Type 21 could travel faster underwater than many escorts could on the surface. It was a weapon that could have revolutionized the war if it had been available earlier. However, production delays and Allied bombing raids meant that only a handful ever saw combat before the war ended. As the Allied armies advanced into Germany, the U-boat bases in France were abandoned. The submarines were forced to operate from Norway and Germany, restricting their access to the Atlantic. The bombing of German shipyards and fuel depots further crippled the fleet. The once mighty U-boat arm was reduced to a shadow of its former self, sending out inexperienced crews on suicide missions. The veteran commanders were mostly dead or captured, and the morale of the force began to crumble. In the final days of the war, Karl Donitz succeeded Hitler as the head of the German state. It was a testament to the high regard in which the U-boat arm was held by the Nazi leadership. Donitz ordered the cessation of hostilities and the surrender of all U-boats. Across the ocean, commanders surfaced their boats and raised the black flag of surrender. It was a bitter end for a force that had fought with such ferocity for nearly 6 years. After the surrender, the Allies launched Operation Deadlight, the mass scuttling of the captured German U-boat fleet. Over 100 submarines were towed out to sea and sunk by naval gunfire and aircraft. It was a symbolic end to the menace that had plagued the Atlantic. The advanced Type 21 boats were spared and divided among the Allies for intense study. Their design would heavily influence the development of the first generation of Cold War submarines. The human cost of the U-boat war was staggering. Of the 40,000 men who served in the German submarine arm, 30,000 never returned home. This casualty rate of 75% was the highest of any branch of the armed forces in the war. These young men died in the crushing depths, often with no graves but the ocean floor. On the Allied side, over 30,000 merchant seamen and thousands of naval personnel lost their lives trying to keep the supply lines open. The legacy of the German U-boat is still visible today on the bottom of the Atlantic. The rusting hulks of hundreds of submarines and thousands of merchant ships lie as silent monuments to the conflict. They are war graves that are slowly being consumed by the sea. The battle they fought was the longest and most complex naval campaign in history. It proved that a determined island nation could be brought to the brink of ruin by a blockade from beneath the waves. In the end, the U-boat was a weapon of immense tactical power but strategic failure. It could inflict grievous wounds, but it could not win the war alone against the combined industrial might of the Allies. The story of the U-boat serves as a chilling reminder of how close the world came to a different future. It stands as a testament to the bravery of the crews on both sides who endured the unimaginable in the unforgiving arena of the Atlantic.